Welcome back to Basic Biostatistics 2 and Session 10. In Session 10, I will show you in two different videos, first how to run Kaplan Meier curves, how to compare Kaplan Meier curves using SPSS, and in the second video, an introduction on survival analysis and how to interpret the findings of Cox regression analysis. In this first video, we're going to talk about Kaplan Meier curves and what statistical test is used to compare whether survival curves are different between a categorical variable. For instance, we would like to know whether survival is different according to normal weight, overweight, and obese dwarfs, meaning that we may think that obese dwarfs have a higher mortality than overweight or normal weight dwarfs. How can we run this in SPSS? Well, it's actually pretty easy. We go to Analyze. We have here, if you scroll down, we have Survival. And on the Survival, we have a new window that opens Live Tables, Kaplan Meier, Cox regression, and Cox time-dependent covariates. For Kaplan Meier, as you probably assume or already guessed, we click on Kaplan Meier. Once we click on Kaplan Meier, we have a new window in SPS that opens where it asks us to define survival time, survival status, and the factor we'd like to use as a comparison. The status is death. It's death or alive. In our case, we can use a status, the variable death. We scroll down until we find here death as an outcome. We select it as a status variable, and now the program asks you, okay, what is the numeral defining death? We know from our analysis from a database that 0 is alive and 1 is death. This means we click on define event and we write 1, as 1 is defined, or the people who died are categorized as 1. We click on continue. Now the benefit of survival analysis is that it takes into consideration survival time, whereas chi-square tests, logistic regression, linear regression do not take into account survival time. Thus, Kaplan Meier curves, Cox regression are very powerful analysis tool for cohort studies in general. Survival time, we have here time of follow-up, all-cause mortality. We click on it and we move it to the time window. Now we have defined that the survival time for each dwarf in regard death, if he's still alive after 20 years of follow-up, his survival time was 20 years. Now what we are left to do is define the factor. This means that what curves we'd like to compare. In our case, they're BMI category curves. So we select BMI category and we move it into the factor window. So far so good. Two more things to do. First of all, we have to go to compare factor. And in the factor we choose which statistical test we like to use to compare the three survival curves. The common test we usually use is the log rank test. So select the log rank test and click on continue. One more thing to do, which is going to options, and under options I usually like to have a plot, a survival plot. You can choose any of these. I suggest you to choose the survival curve, the survival plot, and we click on that little box, we tick the box and click on continue. Now everything is defined. So you see in Kaplan Meier curves we cannot adjust the findings for other variables, so it's really just comparing survival curves. We will not get as an outcome variable odds ratio, hazard ratio, risk ratio. The only thing we get is a p-value whether the survival curves differ. Click on OK opens our output window. SPSS gives us a couple of windows, output tables as usual. The first table is a case processing summary where we see how many people we had in each BMI category, and we see how many events of death occurred in each category. For instance, in the normal weight category we had 17 people, 8 cases of death were observed. In the overweight category we had 29 dwarfs, 13 deaths occurred during the follow-up. And in the obese dwarfs we have out of 14 people, 12 died during the follow-up. The next table is survival table that is actually used for the program to calculate the log rank test. In brief, it lists for each of the observation in each category. It tells us the survival time and it tells you the status after the survey, after the follow-up of the people. Dwarf number 1 died after 7 years of follow-up. Dwarf number 2 died after 8 years of follow-up. Dwarfs 7 till 17, in that body mass index category, they were all alive after 20 years of follow-up. The next table tells us information on the means and medians for survival time of each of the category. For instance, the normal weight dwarfs have a mean survival time of 16.94 years, the overweight dwarfs of 17 years, and the obese dwarfs, their survival time is pretty much lower than the other two categories, 13.571 years. We also can obtain the confidence interval of the mean follow-up time, so this is more or less what you get from this table. Now, the most important table is the test of the log rank test. This is the p-value of the log rank test, significance 0.003. The null hypothesis, as usually, is that there's no difference in survival among the three BMI categories. However, if you have a look at this p-value, the null hypothesis is rejected because our p-value is below 0.05. This means the survival curves, the survival differs among the three BMI categories. If you go to the plot we ask for, we can see this graphically. As we can see that this is the obese dwarfs, their survival curve is very different than the survival curves of the normal weight or the obese dwarfs. In green we have the overweight survival curves of the dwarfs, and in blue we have the normal weight survival curve of our dwarfs. You can also see that even though the log rank test tells us that the difference in the curves, we do not know which curves differ. So this is a downside of Kaplan Meier curves. Anyway, probably if you use common sense, we are pretty sure that the obese dwarfs have different survival curves than the overweight and the normal weight, as they're pretty much parallel. This is how to run Kaplan Meier curves, how to interpret Kaplan Meier curves. So I assume this shouldn't cause any bigger problem. And one of the tasks of the exercise is gonna be to do Kaplan Meier analysis. Thank you very much.